2,500 miles from the Atlantic Ocean, deep inside the Amazon rainforest, a fisherman pulls something beside his canoe that should not be there. Not a river fish, not a caiman, a shark. 7 feet long, freshwater, moving through brown river water beneath jungle canopy, so thick it almost blocks the sky entirely. The Amazon is one of the most biologically crowded places on Earth. Thousands of fish species, flood seasons large enough to swallow forests, water so dark and sediment heavy that beneath the surface, visibility disappears almost immediately. And somewhere inside that system, an ocean predator made itself at home. Bull sharks are not supposed to live here. The nearest coastline is farther away than many people will travel in their entire lives. Most sharks cannot survive outside salt water for long, but the bull shark can. Some individuals have been tracked thousands of miles upriver, vanishing deeper into the Amazon basin than scientists can reliably follow. Indigenous communities along the river have known about them for generations, long before much of the outside world believed sharks were truly living this far inland. And beneath the surface of the river, in water humans can barely see through, they are still there. Long before anyone standing on its banks understood its scale, the Amazon was already carrying mountains toward the sea. Snowmelt from the Andes entered narrow streams high in western South America, gathered into rivers, then folded into something so large that from above it resembles not a waterway, but a continent in motion. The full system stretches roughly 4,000 miles from the slopes of Peru to the Atlantic coast of Brazil, a distance comparable to crossing the ocean between New York and Western Europe. Across that span, the river never truly stops expanding. Tributaries arrive constantly, carrying rainwater, sediments, fallen leaves, uprooted trees, dissolved minerals, and living things from forests that may never see another human being. At its mouth, the Amazon releases nearly 20% of all fresh water entering Earth's oceans. The volume is difficult for the mind to hold steadily. The current pushes so much river water into the Atlantic that the sea itself changes character for miles beyond the coastline, becoming temporarily less salty beneath passing ships. Early European sailors crossed this diluted water without understanding where it came from. Some believed they had entered a hidden inland sea before ever glimpsing land. For much of the year, the river appears to possess stable edges. Then the rains deepen across the basin and the boundaries dissolve. Water levels rise as much as 40 feet, spreading outward into the surrounding rainforest until more than 135,000 square miles of forest become submerged. An area larger than Germany transforms into seasonal water world. Tree trunks vanish halfway beneath the surface. Root systems disappear into warm brown currents. Channels form between forests that only months earlier held dry ground covered in insects and fallen fruit. The water itself conceals nearly everything inside it. Suspended sediment from the Andes mixes with tannins released by vegetation, staining the river the color of dark tea. Visibility collapses almost immediately beneath the surface. A hand lowered into the water disappears inches below the skin of the river. Sunlight weakens quickly there, reduced to a muted glow, drifting through particles of mud and organic matter carried from thousands of miles away. Within that opacity lives an astonishing concentration of life. More than 3,000 fish species are currently known from the Amazon basin, exceeding the total number identified in the entire Atlantic Ocean. Biologists continue describing new species at a pace of roughly one every week. Some are no larger than a finger. Others belong to lineages that have survived almost unchanged for millions of years. Entire ecological relationships remain undocumented, because the system itself is too vast, too layered, and too biologically dense for science to map completely. The river has existed in roughly its present form for around 11 million years. Across that immense duration, it accumulated complexity the way forests accumulate soil, slowly, continuously, almost invisibly. A place this old and this difficult to observe does not reveal all of itself at once. It keeps pockets of uncertainty alive inside the moving water. And somewhere within that uncertainty, something ancient continues to swim, not as an accident or intrusion, but as part of the river's history itself. Beneath the surface of the Amazon, the bull shark carries an internal ocean with it. Its scientific name is Carchahinus lucas, though the Latin matters less than the contradiction contained inside the animal itself. Nearly every large shark on Earth is bound to salt water by the chemistry of its own body. A great white removed from the sea begins failing almost immediately. Water moves uncontrollably into its tissues, salts drain away, and the balance required for nerves, muscles, and organs to function begins collapsing within hours. The ocean is not simply habitat for such sharks, it is part of their bloodstream, part of the invisible chemistry holding every cell together. The bull shark exists outside that rule. The mechanism rests inside a process called osmoregulation, the continuous balancing of salt and water concentrations within living tissue. In the sea, sharks are surrounded by water saltier than their blood. Through the thin surfaces of skin and gills, water constantly escapes outward into the ocean. To survive, marine fish and sharks must replace that loss continuously, drinking seawater and retaining dissolved salts through specialized organs. Freshwater reverses the gradient completely. Rivers like the Amazon are far less salty than the blood of marine animals. Water begins moving inward instead, flooding across membranes and diluting the chemistry cells depend upon. At the same time, sodium and chloride leak outward through the gills into the surrounding river. For most ocean sharks, the process becomes catastrophic. Cells swell, electrical signaling destabilizes, organs shut down one by one beneath the pressure of chemistry they were never built to withstand. Inside the bull shark, something remarkably different unfolds. As salinity drops, sensors within the body detect the shift and trigger a coordinated physiological transition. The kidneys accelerate dramatically, producing urine at more than twice their normal marine rate, flushing excess fresh water back out before tissues become overloaded. Along the gills, specialized ion transporting cells, called ionocytes, reverse their normal role. Instead of releasing salts, they begin actively drawing sodium and chloride inward from the surrounding river, capturing trace minerals drifting through water that would otherwise strip them away. Elsewhere, the rectal gland enters near dormancy. In marine sharks, this organ functions like a biological desalination system, removing excess salt from the bloodstream. In the Amazon, that same process would become deadly. The gland shuts down almost entirely, conserving every available ion with extraordinary efficiency. Even with these adaptations, the transformation is expensive. The shark must maintain near marine salinity within its blood while moving through water that contains only a fraction of those dissolved salts. Every second inside the river requires active regulation. Energy is burned continuously to preserve the narrow chemical balance life depends upon. The bull shark survives the Amazon not because fresh water is easy for it, but because evolution gradually assembled a body capable of paying the cost. Nothing about this process resembles conscious decision. No shark chooses to reconfigure its bloodstream. These mechanisms are written into tissues, glands, kidneys, and cells, shaped slowly across immense evolutionary time. Long before any human boat drifted through these waters, The physiology already existed, waiting at the edge where rivers meet the sea, capable of following fresh water further inland than any other large shark on Earth. Near the northern coast of Brazil, the Atlantic Ocean begins losing its certainty. The water freshens gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, as the Amazon empties into the sea around Marajo Island. From above, the river mouth appears less like a channel than a spreading weather system, more than 200 miles across, releasing pale sediment into dark ocean water in enormous swirling plumes. Early European ships passed this coastline without recognizing they had reached a river at all. Sailors tasted fresh water far from land and assumed the sea itself had changed. Here, the boundary between ocean and river never stays fixed for long. During dry months, Atlantic tides and denser salt water press inland through the lower channels, sliding beneath the freshwater surface and reaching dozens of miles upriver. When seasonal rains intensify across the basin, the balance reverses. Freshwater surges eastward with such force that it pushes the ocean backward into the Atlantic. The meeting place shifts constantly, breathing in slow cycles between sea and continent. Within this unstable threshold lies the beginning of the bull shark's inland passage. Tracking studies reveal that sharks entering the Amazon rarely travel directly from saltwater into the river interior. They linger in the estuary gradient for days, sometimes weeks, moving through layered currents where salinity changes hour by hour with the tides. Beneath the surface, the water forms invisible bands of differing density, and the shark drifts between them while its body recalibrates internally. Kidneys, gills, blood chemistry, and dormant glands all adjust in careful sequence. The transformation unfolds gradually, carried out in darkness beneath floating islands of vegetation and drifting sediment. Only after this transition stabilizes does the movement inland truly begin. Migrating bull sharks travel steadily upriver at roughly 20 to 40 miles each day. The progress is neither hurried nor random. The Amazon does not offer a single corridor leading westward. It separates constantly into branching waterways, narrow side channels, flooded islands, and looping bends that reconnect miles later in entirely different configurations. During high water, whole sections of forest become temporary extensions of the river itself. Yet the sharks continue inland through this shifting geography with remarkable consistency, guided by senses tuned to pressure changes, electrical signals, current direction, and dissolved chemical traces carried through the flow. 500 miles from the Atlantic, the last influence of ocean salinity disappears. The water there contains no meaningful trace of the sea the shark left behind. Rainfall, mountain runoff, and forest tributaries now define the chemistry entirely. Vast distances separate these reaches from coastal cities or shipping routes. The river widens and narrows unpredictably beneath skies crowded with tropical storms. At 1,000 miles inland, the migration enters spaces so remote that many surrounding forests have never been systematically surveyed by biologists. Villages appear occasionally along the banks, then vanish again into uninterrupted green. The shark continues westward beneath all of it, carrying within its bloodstream the physiological memory of the ocean. At approximately 2,500 miles upriver, the scientific record fades. Acoustic transmitters attached to tagged sharks cease appearing in receiver databases, not because the animals necessarily stop moving, but because the network itself ends. Beyond the last anchored receiver, the river continues through tributaries and floodplains extending toward the Andes. The sharks move onward into water where observation falls away, and the current keeps carrying the continent quietly west to east through the night. For the bull shark, the Amazon is not silent blackness, It is movement layered upon movement, signals drifting through water in overlapping currents, a landscape assembled not from light, but from sensation. A human entering the river at night encounters almost immediate sensory collapse. The surface reflects only fragments of moonlight through drifting cloud and canopy. Beneath that thin reflective skin, visibility disappears. Water closes around the body like fabric stained with sediment and dissolved vegetation. Shapes dissolve inches from the face. Sound arrives strangely, softened by humidity and distance. The river seems empty because human senses were not built for this environment. The shark experiences something entirely different. Running along both sides of its body is the lateral line, a delicate system of fluid filled canals embedded beneath the skin. Tiny sensory cells inside these canals register disturbances in surrounding water with extraordinary precision. A struggling fish does not merely move through the river, it pushes waves of pressure outward in expanding patterns. A swimming caiman leaves behind turbulence. Rain striking the surface creates countless overlapping signatures. Even the steady pulse of current around submerged roots alters the flow in recognizable ways. The shark reads these distortions continuously, separating them from one another the way the human ear separates instruments within music. Research suggests the lateral line can detect movement from prey hundreds of feet away under favorable conditions. Long before a fish enters striking distance, the shark already knows its direction, speed, and rhythm. The river becomes a field of invisible contours, every living body announcing itself through displaced water. Closer to the snout, another sensory system begins operating at even finer scale. Hundreds of microscopic pores scattered across the shark's head open into gel filled canals called the ampullae of Lorenzini. These organs detect electrical fields produced naturally by living tissue. Every heartbeat generates a faint pulse. Every muscle contraction releases tiny electrical changes into surrounding water. A fish hidden beneath silt still broadcasts itself through the firing of nerves along its spine. The sensitivity borders on the astonishing. Bull sharks can perceive electrical gradients measured in millionths of a volt. In water where vision contributes almost nothing, the shark traces life itself through electricity, following invisible currents emitted by breathing animals concealed beneath roots, mud, or darkness. Chemical information drifts through the river as well. The shark's olfactory system continuously samples dissolved particles carried by the current. Blood becomes detectable at concentrations as low as 1 part per million, roughly equivalent to a single drop dispersed through 25 gallons of water. Yet blood is only one signal among thousands. Mucus, waste, decaying tissue, spawning pheromones, stress chemicals released by injured fish all move downstream in faint suspended trails. The Amazon carries these molecular traces immense distances, turning the current itself into a flowing archive of biological activity. Together, these systems produce an environment rich with structure and detail. Pressure, electricity, and chemistry overlap into a constantly shifting sensory map, updating from moment to moment. What appears opaque from above becomes navigable from within. The suspended organic matter filling Amazonian water may even strengthen parts of this sensory world. Dissolved compounds bind and transport chemical traces efficiently through the slow moving floodplain channels, extending scent trails farther than many clear water systems allow. Far below the visible surface, the bull shark moves through this dense field of information with quiet precision, inhabiting a river that to it has never been dark at all. Inside the bloodstream of the bull shark, chemistry runs unusually hot. Laboratory analysis of male bull sharks has revealed testosterone concentrations exceeding those measured in any other animal yet studied. including large terrestrial predators whose behavior humans typically associate with aggression and territoriality. What makes the finding remarkable is not simply the peak value itself, but the consistency. Elevated hormone levels persist outside mating periods, remaining high across much of the animal's adult life, rather than appearing only in brief seasonal surges. Hormones do not create behavior alone, yet they alter the sensitivity of the systems responding to the world. In vertebrate brains, testosterone influences territoriality, feeding competition, risk tolerance, and the speed with which perceived threats trigger action. The bull shark appears built around exactly this pattern of rapid response. Comparative neurological studies suggest that regions of the shark's brain associated with sensory integration and threat processing are proportionally pronounced relative to many other shark species. Signals arriving from the environment move quickly into action pathways, with very little delay between detection and response. In evolutionary terms, such speed can become advantageous in murky estuaries, crowded coastlines, and tidal rivers where prey appears suddenly and disappears just as fast. In open ocean conditions, vision helps regulate this process. A shark may detect a pressure disturbance or electrical signal first, but clear water provides additional fractions of a second for visual confirmation. Shape, size, movement pattern, and orientation enter the sensory picture before the animal commits fully to pursuit or attack. Light slows uncertainty by adding detail. The Amazon strips much of that moderation away. Within its suspended sediments and tannin dark currents, visual information collapses into fragments. A stimulus arrives first through vibration, then electricity, then chemistry. The shark reacts while still operating inside partial sensory data. A struggling fish, hidden behind submerged roots, produces pressure pulses nearly identical to those of another moving body. An electrical signature flickers briefly through opaque water and vanishes again into current and distance. The animal's nervous system, already tuned toward fast interpretation, resolves ambiguity quickly because hesitation in such environments carries its own biological cost. This combination produces a behavioral profile unlike that of most large sharks. High baseline testosterone, strong territorial tendencies, accelerated response timing, and sensory conditions that minimize visual verification all converge within the same animal. Marine biologists studying shark incidents have long noted that bull sharks are disproportionately represented in attacks occurring near river mouths, estuaries, harbors, and sediment-rich coastal zones where visibility remains poor. When habitat overlap is considered, the species becomes statistically associated with more encounters involving humans than great whites or tiger sharks. Yet the Amazon itself does not transform the shark into something unnatural. The river merely favors traits already present. Low visibility rewards rapid interpretation of incomplete signals. Territorial behavior becomes reinforced within crowded channels and seasonal feeding zones. Physiological flexibility allows the shark to remain in environments where few other large predators of its kind can operate effectively. The result is an animal carrying both extraordinary adaptability and extraordinary neurological intensity through one of the most biologically crowded river systems on Earth. Far beneath the surface, sensory signals flow constantly into a brain, evolved to answer them with speed, precision, and very little hesitation, while villages, fishing boats, and narrow riverbanks continue existing above the same moving water. Across much of the Amazon basin, daily life still unfolds at the water's edge. Boats replace roads. Children learn currents before they learn maps. Fishing nets dry on wooden docks, while clothes are washed directly in the river. The boundary between human activity and aquatic habitat barely exists in many communities, especially during the long flood season when water spreads outward into forests, pathways, and temporary settlements. Yet, despite this constant proximity, there is no complete historical record of shark encounters in the Amazon. The basin stretches across thousands of miles and multiple countries, containing isolated villages reachable only after days of river travel. Injuries occurring in remote tributaries often remain local knowledge, spoken about within families or neighboring communities, but never entering official databases. Communication infrastructure in many regions remained minimal well into the modern era, and even now, some settlements possess little consistent connection to outside institutions. When serious animal attacks occur, the responsible species may never be conclusively identified. The International Shark Attack File maintains confirmed reports of freshwater bull shark incidents in South American rivers, though researchers familiar with Amazonian field conditions generally regard the documented cases as incomplete. Some injuries attributed historically to caimans or large catfish may in fact have involved sharks. In other cases, survivors never saw the animal clearly enough to distinguish what struck them beneath opaque water. Patterns observed elsewhere in freshwater bull shark territory offer additional context. In Lake Nicaragua and several river systems in Guatemala, incidents involving humans increase during seasonal flooding. Expanding water carries sharks into shallow margins where people fish, bathe, cross channels, or gather flooded vegetation. Encounters become more likely not because the sharks seek humans specifically, but because both species begin occupying the same compressed spaces within altered seasonal geography. Most recorded freshwater bull shark bites are single strikes rather than sustained predatory attacks. Marine biologists often describe them as investigatory responses, rapid sensory assessments delivered through jaws powerful enough to inflict catastrophic injury, regardless of intent. In dark or sediment rich water, the shark reacts first and resolves uncertainty afterward. The consequences for a human body remain severe either way. One of the most historically significant examples occurred far from the Amazon itself during the 1916 New Jersey shark attacks that later inspired the cultural mythology surrounding Jaws. Among the 5 attacks, one cluster unfolded 11 miles inland along Matawan Creek, a tidal freshwater channel. 2 people died there, far beyond where most residents believed large sharks could travel. Modern analysis strongly suggests a bull shark was responsible, moving upriver through conditions remarkably similar to those found in tropical estuaries elsewhere in the world. Along the Amazon, local river communities developed practical behavioral adaptations generations ago. In some regions, children are taught not to enter certain flooded inlets during particular months. Fishermen avoid quiet bends where current slows and debris accumulates after heavy rains. These patterns are transmitted calmly, folded into ordinary river knowledge alongside navigation routes, weather signs, and seasonal fish migrations. Such caution rarely carries the tone of myth or panic. The shark is treated instead as one more presence within the broader living system of the river, dangerous under specific conditions, absent under others, always belonging to the water itself. Scientific certainty remains limited because the Amazon conceals evidence as efficiently as it conceals the animals moving beneath its surface. Many encounters likely vanished into current, memory, and distance long before researchers arrived carrying notebooks and acoustic receivers. At certain times of year, maps of the Amazon become temporarily inaccurate. Boundaries that appeared stable during the dry months begin dissolving beneath incoming water, and the distinction between river and forest fades into something fluid and shifting. Rainfall accumulating across the basin moves gradually downstream until the entire system starts rising together. Between November and June, water levels across large sections of the Amazon climb 30 to 40 feet, spreading outward through valleys and lowlands until roughly 135,000 square miles of rainforest stand underwater. This transformation creates the Varja, the flooded forest. It is not marshland or stagnant swamp, but mature rainforest submerged beneath slow moving currents. Towering trees stand rooted in water 20 feet deep. Their lower branches disappear beneath the surface, while canopy leaves continue absorbing sunlight high above. In places, the forest becomes navigable only by canoe, drifting between trunks that months earlier stood over dry leaf litter and insects. Life reorganizes itself around this seasonal expansion with extraordinary precision. Fish enter the forest in vast numbers to feed on fruit, seeds, and insects falling from submerged vegetation. Pacu crush nuts with teeth evolved to handle hard plant material. Long schools of silverfish thread between drowned roots where sunlight filters downward in dim green shafts. Overhead, monkeys continue moving through the canopy, while river dolphins glide through spaces that had been dry land at the end of the previous season. The ecosystem stretches vertically now, from branches alive with birds to dark, submerged corridors beneath the trees. Bull sharks move into this transformed world as the waters rise. Acoustic tracking data reveals that shark migrations correspond closely with the flood pulse itself. As water expands into the Varzea, tagged sharks gradually leave deeper channels and travel through newly connected waterways into the submerged forest. Their routes carry them between tree trunks, over flooded plains, and through temporary aquatic corridors extending miles beyond the visible riverbanks. During peak inundation, sharks occupy regions that appear from above to be uninterrupted rainforest canopy despite deep water flowing silently underneath. For generations, indigenous fishermen described encountering large sharks in flooded woodland so distant from the main channel that the stories seemed geographically impossible. Canoes moving quietly among submerged trees would sometimes pass over broad shapes, sliding beneath them through water that had not existed there a few months earlier. Once the flood pulse is understood, the reports become entirely coherent. During the wet season, the river no longer possesses a fixed edge. It expands outward into a seasonal inland sea. At maximum flood, the bull shark's effective territory becomes an immense interconnected network of channels, lakes, drowned valleys, and forest basins extending across hundreds of thousands of square miles. The available prey changes with it. Fish disperse through shallow feeding grounds rich in fallen vegetation. Rodents, reptiles, and other terrestrial animals become trapped or exhausted by rising water. Juvenile caimans move through unfamiliar currents among submerged roots and debris. The energy reward of this expanded hunting territory may explain why bull sharks penetrate so deeply into the Amazon despite the enormous metabolic demands of maintaining freshwater chemistry for extended periods. The flooded forest offers access to seasonal resources unavailable during lower water months. Eventually, the basin begins draining again. Water retreats gradually from the trees, exposing roots, mudbanks, and forest floor once more. The sharks withdraw with the receding flood, returning toward permanent channels while remaining inside the river system, waiting through the dry season for the next rise that has arrived reliably for millions of years. The smallest bull sharks ever documented in the Amazon changed the entire meaning of their presence there. Researchers working in freshwater sections of the basin began capturing juveniles less than 3 feet long, animals carrying the unmistakable proportions of newborn sharks. Their scars were fresh, their bodies compact, their movements abrupt and inexperienced. These were not migrants arriving from the Atlantic after a long upriver journey. They had entered the world here, inside freshwater channels and flooded forest systems, thousands of miles from the sea. Female bull sharks are viviparous, meaning they give birth to live young rather than laying eggs. Inside the mother's body, embryos develop over roughly 10 to 11 months, nourished internally until birth. Litters usually contain between 1 and 13 pups, each arriving already capable of independent movement and hunting. In ocean environments, however, survival begins under immediate danger. Newly born sharks share coastal waters with larger predators, including adult bull sharks themselves. Cannibalism among sharks is common enough that birth can place juveniles directly into the hunting range of their own species. Freshwater changes that equation completely. Most marine predators capable of hunting juvenile sharks cannot tolerate prolonged exposure to freshwater. The physiological barrier that limits other large sharks to the ocean becomes, for bull shark pups, a form of protection. Rivers create refuge simply by being inaccessible to the animals that would otherwise feed upon them. The Amazon, with its immense floodplains and seasonally submerged shallows, provides something even more valuable than isolation. It offers space. Evidence increasingly suggests that pregnant females travel inland specifically to give birth within these protected environments. During flood season, vast sections of the Varzea transform into calm, shallow habitat, rich in cover and food. Young sharks can move through submerged vegetation, root systems, and drowned forest corridors where larger predators are scarce and visibility remains limited. The flooded forest becomes a nursery extending across enormous portions of the basin. Juvenile bull sharks spend their early years within this freshwater world. As they grow larger, their range gradually expands toward estuaries and eventually coastal waters, where their increasing size reduces vulnerability to predation. The movement outward appears slow and incremental, tied to physical maturity rather than a sudden migration. In this sense, the Amazon functions not merely as habitat, but as the earliest stage of the shark's life cycle, shaping the animal before it ever encounters the open Atlantic. Very few marine predators rely on a reproductive strategy crossing ecosystem boundaries this completely. Sea turtles nest on beaches yet feed in the ocean. Salmon hatch in rivers before maturing at sea. The bull shark occupies a stranger position between worlds. It is an ocean predator whose offspring begin life among submerged trees, drifting leaves, and freshwater currents carrying sediments from distant mountains. Within the flooded forest, young sharks move through territory filled with unfamiliar neighbors. River dolphins pass through narrow channels overhead. Schools of freshwater fish scatter through roots and branches. Insects strike the surface while rain falls through canopy gaps onto water that did not exist there months earlier. The juveniles navigate all of it, with sensory systems already functioning at remarkable precision, reading pressure, chemistry, and electrical signals long before reaching full size. The result is an animal whose ancestry belongs to the sea, yet whose earliest memories, if such things exist in sharks at all, are formed beneath rainforest canopy in the shifting waters of the Amazon basin. For much of the 20th century, scientists believed they already understood freshwater bull sharks. The confidence came largely from one place, Lake Nicaragua, a vast inland lake in Central America, connected to the Caribbean Sea by the Rio San Juan. Sharks had been documented there for generations, swimming in fresh water more than 100 miles from the ocean. Because the population appeared isolated inside the lake, researchers concluded that these animals must represent an entirely separate species, cut off from marine relatives for immense spans of time. They gave the shark a different scientific name, Carcharodonus nicaraguensis. The classification shaped scientific thinking for decades. If freshwater sharks in Nicaragua were isolated relics evolving independently from ocean populations, then reports emerging from other river systems were interpreted through the same assumption. Freshwater sharks became viewed as rare biological exceptions, disconnected fragments surviving in unusual pockets of habitat. Accounts from the Amazon suggesting large mobile shark populations deep inland seemed difficult to reconcile with that framework. Many researchers treated them cautiously or dismissed them altogether. The error persisted because the available tools of the time could not easily test the underlying assumption. Morphology alone offered few clear answers. Bull sharks already vary naturally in size, coloration, and body proportions depending on age and environment. Freshwater individuals displayed subtle differences from coastal animals, enough to reinforce the belief that they represented something evolutionarily distinct. Only later did genetic analysis begin dissolving the classification. When tissue samples from Lake Nicaragua sharks were finally compared with Atlantic bull sharks, the supposed species boundary disappeared almost immediately. The sharks were genetically identical. There was no isolated freshwater species at all. The animals in the lake belonged to the same globally distributed bull shark population, moving between marine and freshwater systems far more freely than researchers had imagined. The correction forced a second realization, even more surprising than the first. Lake Nicaragua was not biologically sealed from the sea. Bull sharks were actively traveling between the Caribbean and the lake through the Rio San Juan, a river descending only about 100 feet across, roughly 110 miles. Along portions of the route, sharks navigated rapids by surging through turbulent channels in bursts resembling the movements of migrating salmon. Local indigenous communities along the river had known this behavior for generations. Fishermen had watched sharks moving upriver long before formal biological surveys arrived. Yet those observations rarely entered scientific literature with equal authority. The prevailing assumption that oceans and inland rivers functioned as separate ecological worlds prevented many researchers from fully accepting what local experience already treated as ordinary fact. The consequences reached beyond taxonomy. Because the Nicaragua population had been misunderstood for so long, recognition of Amazon bull sharks as part of a connected migratory breeding system was delayed by decades. Reports from South America, Africa, and Asia continued encountering institutional skepticism whenever large sharks appeared deep within freshwater environments. River systems such as the Zambezi, the Ganges, and the Amazon repeatedly challenged assumptions science had inherited from earlier classifications. The eventual correction marked more than the renaming of a shark. It exposed a deeper conceptual mistake about the natural world itself. Rivers and oceans had been treated as rigid biological boundaries, divided into separate domains inhabited by separate creatures. The bull shark revealed something more fluid, an animal capable of moving between those worlds so completely that the distinction itself began to blur. Before researchers began implanting acoustic tags or collecting tissue samples from sharks in the Amazon, the river communities already understood the animals well enough to live beside them safely. Knowledge moved through conversation rather than scientific journals, carried between generations by fishermen, boat builders, and families whose lives depended on reading the water correctly. Along thousands of miles of riverbank, the presence of large sharks was treated not as mystery, but as practical reality. Among the Ribeirinho, Ticuna, Kayapo, and many other indigenous groups throughout the basin, knowledge about sharks formed part of daily environmental awareness. It included specific observations tied to season, geography, and water conditions. Certain bends in the river were approached cautiously during flood months. Some stretches of flooded forest were avoided when currents slowed and fish activity changed suddenly. Experienced fishermen learned to recognize disturbances at the surface that suggested a large body moving below shallow water. This understanding developed through repeated contact across generations. Communities living beside the river spent thousands of cumulative hours observing flood cycles, fish migrations, and predator behavior. Children learned where it was safe to swim, and when the river became dangerous, the information was detailed enough to function as survival knowledge rather than folklore. It existed because ignoring it carried consequences. During the 19th century, European naturalists traveling through the Amazon recorded local reports describing sharks far inland, yet many dismissed those accounts when publishing their findings. Some suggested that indigenous witnesses had mistaken oversized catfish for sharks. Others treated the reports as exaggeration shaped by superstition or unreliable storytelling. The problem was not lack of testimony. The problem was that freshwater sharks contradicted prevailing scientific assumptions about how shark physiology worked. At the time, many scientists considered long-term survival of large sharks in freshwater biologically impossible. Because the conclusion already existed before the evidence was examined, observations from local communities were filtered through skepticism from the beginning. Reports that aligned with accepted theory were preserved more easily than reports that challenged it. The cost of that dismissal stretched across decades. Scientific understanding of Amazon bull sharks advanced far more slowly than it might have otherwise. River communities continued relying on local knowledge systems, while outside institutions debated whether the sharks existed in meaningful numbers at all. In some places, people who trusted formal scientific opinion over inherited river knowledge lost access to warning systems that had protected communities for generations. Researchers who eventually confirmed breeding bull shark populations in the Amazon later acknowledged this directly. Several noted in published work that indigenous testimony, had it been taken seriously from the beginning, could have accelerated recognition of the population substantially. The observations required to identify the sharks had always been available. They simply existed outside the institutions, deciding what counted as valid evidence. Modern conservation biology now uses the term traditional ecological knowledge, often shortened to TEK, to describe these long accumulated systems of environmental understanding. Across many ecosystems, scientists increasingly recognize that excluding such knowledge created major blind spots in ecological research throughout much of the 20th century. Along the Amazon, the lesson became unusually clear. The people who lived beside the river had described the sharks accurately all along. The animals moved through the flooded waterways exactly where local communities said they would, following rhythms already known to those who spent their lives listening carefully to the river. Long before the Amazon River existed in its modern form, Western South America looked nothing like the continent visible today. Much of the region lay beneath a vast inland sea called the Pebas system, a warm expanse of interconnected wetlands and shallow marine water linked intermittently to the Caribbean basin. Mangrove coastlines stretched across areas now occupied by rainforest. Sediment drifted slowly through broad estuaries, where fresh water and salt water mixed continuously beneath humid prehistoric skies. Ancestral bull sharks already inhabited those waters. The Andes Mountains were still rising then, pushed upward gradually by tectonic forces deep beneath the continent. As the mountains grew higher across millions of years, they altered the direction of water flow throughout South America. Rivers that had once drained westward toward the Pacific became blocked by uplifted terrain. The Pebas Sea slowly fragmented and drained eastward, carving channels that would eventually merge into the modern Amazon basin. The transformation did not happen suddenly. No generation of sharks experienced a single moment when ocean became river. Salinity shifted gradually across immense spans of geological time. Water that had once been marine grew incrementally fresher century after century, while channels expanded through newly formed lowlands. Marine animals living within those transitional environments either adapted or disappeared. Bull sharks possessed an advantage already shaped elsewhere. Their osmoregulatory flexibility had evolved originally within coastal estuaries, places where tides and river outflow constantly altered salt concentration. Individuals capable of tolerating fluctuating salinity survived more effectively in those unstable habitats. Over evolutionary time, that physiological flexibility became deeply embedded within the species. When the Pebas system transformed into an increasingly freshwater network, the bull shark's existing biology allowed certain populations to persist while other marine predators retreated. The adaptation was not designed for the Amazon specifically. It simply happened to align perfectly with the environmental changes reshaping the continent around them. Evidence of that ancient continuity still exists in stone. Shark skeletons rarely fossilize because cartilage decomposes quickly after death, but teeth preserve remarkably well. Fossil bull shark teeth have been recovered from South American sediment layers dating back millions of years, remnants of animals that occupied these waters while the river itself was still forming. Each tooth records the presence of sharks long before human beings existed anywhere near the basin. Modern genetic analysis adds another layer to the story. Amazon bull sharks show subtle divergence from Atlantic coastal populations, small differences accumulated through partial isolation across long periods of time. The divergence is not sufficient to classify them as a separate species, yet it suggests that these river populations have maintained continuity for far longer than early researchers once assumed. Gene flow still occurs, but slowly, through occasional migrations between ocean and river. The implication changes the entire perspective on the animal's history in the basin. The sharks moving through the Amazon today may descend directly from populations that experienced the geological birth of the river itself. Their ancestors inhabited the transitional waters that existed before the modern rainforest fully emerged, surviving while mountains rose and continental drainage patterns reorganized around them. From a human perspective, the bull shark appears to have entered the Amazon from somewhere else, crossing an impossible boundary between sea and rainforest. Geological time tells a quieter story. The river changed around the sharks gradually enough that no invasion ever occurred. Water shifted, continents reshaped themselves, and the animals simply remained, adapting continuously as the world transformed over millions of years. Most of what scientists know about Amazon bull sharks comes not from direct observation, but from brief electronic whispers traveling through dark water. Somewhere beneath the river's surface, a tagged shark passes silently near an underwater receiver, and for a moment, the machine records its presence. A timestamp appears in a database, latitude, depth, direction. Then the animal disappears again into a system too large and opaque for any person to follow continuously. The technology responsible for these fragments of knowledge is acoustic telemetry. Researchers surgically implant a small transmitter, roughly the size of a AA battery, into the shark's body cavity. Each transmitter emits a unique acoustic pulse at programmed intervals. Fixed receivers anchored along river channels detect those signals whenever a shark passes within range, usually between 200 and 500 meters, depending on water conditions and current noise. Building that network inside the Amazon is an undertaking shaped as much by geography as biology. Research teams travel for weeks by aluminum boat through tributaries, inaccessible by road, carrying fuel, surgical equipment, batteries, steel cables, and waterproof instrumentation through humidity intense enough to corrode electronics within days. Receivers anchored during dry months can vanish entirely once flood season rearranges the river. Trees fall into channels, sediment buries equipment, entire sections of shoreline relocate beneath changing currents. Capturing the sharks requires patience and controlled risk. At dawn or dusk, researchers set large baited hooks attached to heavy steel leaders from small boats drifting near deep channels or flooded margins. When a bull shark takes the bait, the river changes instantly. The animal surges away with abrupt force, stripping line while rolling and thrashing beneath the surface. Bringing a 300-pound shark alongside a narrow aluminum hull in low visibility water demands coordination between several experienced people working within tight physical space. Once secured beside the boat, the shark is carefully inverted into tonic immobility, a temporary trance like state observed in many shark species. For several minutes, the animal becomes comparatively still, though the tail may continue flexing with enough force to injure anyone positioned incorrectly nearby. Researchers work quickly under headlamps while the boat shifts against current and rain. Measurements are taken first: length, sex, physical condition. Tissue samples are collected for later genetic analysis. Then a small incision is made along the underside of the body cavity, and the transmitter is inserted internally before the wound is closed with sutures designed to dissolve gradually in water. The entire procedure usually lasts between 8 and 12 minutes. When finished, the shark is guided back into the river. For a few moments, the team waits in near silence, watching dark water settle around the boat while monitoring the nearest receiver for returning signals. If the transmitter appears again, moving steadily away through the channel, the operation succeeded. From these scattered detections, researchers reconstruct migration corridors, seasonal flood movements, residency zones, and upriver penetration distances impossible to observe directly. Yet even now the data remains fragmentary. Each receiver covers only a tiny portion of the basin, and beyond the final instrumented tributary, the river continues unmonitored for thousands of miles. The resulting portrait emerges slowly, assembled from isolated signals crossing invisible water in the middle of the rainforest night. Scientists rarely see the sharks they study for more than a few minutes at a time. Most of the animal's existence survives only as faint acoustic traces moving through darkness beneath the current. From above, the Amazon appears less like a single river than a circulatory system spread across a continent. The main channel gathers water from more than 1,100 tributaries, many so large they would rank among the greatest rivers on Earth on their own. 17 extend beyond 1,000 miles in length, carrying Andean runoff, forest rainfall, and sediment through labyrinths of flooded valleys and remote jungle corridors before eventually merging with the main flow. The bull shark does not remain confined to the central artery of that system. Confirmed captures and credible reports place the species within multiple major tributaries, including the Rio Solimões and the Rio Madeira, as well as river systems extending into Peru, Colombia, and Bolivia. Each tributary presents different chemistry, temperature, current behavior, sediment load, and seasonal flooding patterns. To move through the basin is not merely to travel distance. It is to cross between shifting aquatic environments layered within one enormous watershed. Among these rivers, the Rio Negro remains one of the most intriguing unanswered questions in Amazon shark research. Its waters flow dark as brewed tea, stained almost black by dissolved tannins released from decomposing forest vegetation. Chemically, the river is unusually acidic, often ranging between a pH of 3.5 and 5.5, conditions harsh enough that many fish species struggle to survive there at all. Whether bull sharks regularly enter this system remains uncertain. Near the city of Manaus, the Rio Negro meets the sediment heavy Amazon main channel in one of the basin's strangest visible phenomena. Because the two rivers differ in density, temperature, and speed, they run side by side for miles before mixing completely. From the surface, the boundary appears unmistakable. One side moves dark and reflective beneath black water, the other carries opaque brown current dense with suspended sediment. The dividing line remains sharp enough to trace visually from boats above. For a shark navigating through electroreception, chemical sensing, and pressure detection, this confluence must represent an abrupt sensory transition. The animal encounters not merely a different current, but an entirely different aquatic chemistry. Researchers still do not know how bull sharks respond at that boundary. Some may cross directly into the acidic blackwater system, others may turn away. No continuous tracking data yet follows a shark through the transition itself. The difficulty lies partly in scale. Mapping bull shark distribution across the tributary network would require instrumentation extending through immense stretches of inaccessible river, much of it beyond permanent infrastructure or regular scientific access. Acoustic receivers cover only isolated fragments of habitat separated by hundreds of miles of unmonitored water. Between those fragments, entire migration corridors remain invisible. Each tributary contains its own flood cycles, submerged forests, side channels, and seasonal lakes. Many pass through regions visited rarely, even by local communities. Once a shark moves beyond the last monitored receiver, it enters territory where science loses contact completely. The river continues, but the data stops. What researchers currently possess is therefore less a complete map than a scattering of illuminated points inside a much larger darkness. Every confirmed detection expands the known range slightly farther outward. Yet the pattern emerging from those signals strongly suggests the animals occupy far more of the basin than direct evidence has managed to capture. The tributary network stretches onward through rainforest beyond observation, carrying possibilities still hidden within the moving water. Long before the bull shark moved through the flooded arteries of the Amazon, the basin already belonged to an ancient assembly of predators, shaped by millions of years inside warm, sediment-heavy water. The river was not empty space waiting to be occupied. It was a living hierarchy, crowded with hunters adapted to ambush, constriction, electricity, speed, and coordinated violence. When the shark entered this system, it arrived not as a ruler, but as another contender inside an ecosystem already filled with giants. Among the oldest and largest is the black caiman, Melanosuchus niger, an animal capable of reaching nearly 20 feet in length and weighing more than 2,600 pounds. In still backwaters, its body often resembles a drifting log until the head begins to move. The black caiman evolved in South America long before the modern Amazon took its current form, surviving climatic shifts and ecological transformations across immense spans of geological time. Its bite force ranks among the strongest in the animal kingdom, designed to seize turtles, fish, mammals, and anything else struggling within reach of the surface. Elsewhere in the basin, giant river otters move through quieter channels in coordinated family groups. At 6 feet long and roughly 70 pounds, a single individual appears modest beside the caiman or the shark, yet their power emerges collectively. Researchers have documented groups mobbing juvenile caimans, surrounding them with bites and rapid attacks until the reptile retreats or dies from accumulated injuries. Their vocalizations carry through the forested waterways in whistles and sharp barking calls, one predator announcing itself loudly in a river where most others remain silent. Beneath floating vegetation and submerged branches, the green anaconda waits in slower water. It is the heaviest snake on Earth, capable of exceeding 550 pounds, with a body thick as a fallen tree trunk. Unlike terrestrial constrictors, it moves with deceptive ease underwater, using buoyancy to conceal its mass. Deer, capybara, birds, and caimans all appear within its diet. The river compresses distance around an anaconda. One still shape near the shoreline can suddenly become motion. Even electricity enters the hierarchy through the electric eel, Electrophorus electricus. Despite its name, it is not a true eel, but a knife fish capable of generating discharges approaching 860 volts. In muddy water, those pulses create an invisible field surrounding the animal. Historical accounts describe horses collapsing after entering shallow channels occupied by concentrated groups of eels. For the bull shark, the eel is less a predator than part of the sensory landscape itself, another living signal vibrating through the water and into the shark's electroreceptive pores. Inside this crowded network, the bull shark remains unusual because it enters from somewhere else entirely. It is an ocean predator carrying instincts shaped in estuaries and coastlines, now navigating an inland ecosystem populated by animals with no marine equivalent. A black caiman resting in opaque shallows represents a competitor unlike anything found in the Atlantic. Neither species evolved alongside the other in their earliest ancestry, yet they now occupy overlapping hunting grounds. Documented confrontations between bull sharks and black caimans reveal no permanent victor. Outcomes shift according to size, depth, ambush position, and momentum. A large caiman can overpower a shark through crushing force and armored leverage. A fast-moving shark can inflict devastating bites before the reptile fully reacts. The balance remains unstable, shaped encounter by encounter within dark water where visibility disappears almost immediately. The Amazon never granted dominance freely. The bull shark survived here because it learned to persist among predators that already understood the river long before it arrived. The river carries food differently from the sea. In the Atlantic, prey often moves across open water in visible schools or along coastlines shaped by tides and light. Inside the Amazon, nourishment drifts through flooded timber, beneath suspended roots, across drowned plains where forest and river temporarily become the same place. A bull shark entering this world does not encounter familiar marine animals wading inland. It finds an entirely different assembly of bodies, scales, muscle, and movement, and somehow it remains perfectly capable of feeding within it. Along tropical coastlines, the bull shark behaves as a broad opportunist. Fish, rays, sea turtles, dolphins, seabirds, and smaller sharks all appear in marine dietary studies. That flexibility becomes essential once the animal pushes into fresh water. The Amazon changes constantly with flood cycles, sediment loads, and seasonal migrations. A predator dependent on one narrow prey source would eventually fail here. The shark survives because it accepts almost anything large enough to justify pursuit. Stomach content analysis from bull sharks captured in Amazonian systems reveals prey drawn entirely from rainforest waters. Large catfish appear frequently, including species capable of surpassing 200 pounds. Some migrate enormous distances through the basin in dense seasonal movements, turning sections of river into living corridors of muscle and silver skin. Other remains include tambaqui and pacu, deep-bodied caracid fish whose crushing jaws evolved to break hard fruits and seeds falling from flooded trees. The shark meets those thick, powerful fish with blunt force, accelerating through opaque water before the prey fully senses what approaches. Among the most remarkable prey items identified are fragments of Arapaima gigas, one of the largest freshwater fish on Earth. Full-grown individuals can approach 10 feet in length and weigh more than 440 pounds. Their scales form a layered biological composite so resistant that even piranhas struggle to pierce them. River communities have long treated the fish almost like armored creatures rather than ordinary prey. Yet bull sharks still manage to kill them, likely by targeting softer tissue near the fins, throat, or belly, or by focusing on juveniles before the scales thicken completely. Evidence of predation on Boto, the pink river dolphin, emerges less through direct observation than through forensic traces left on carcasses recovered along muddy shorelines. Some bear unmistakable, crescent-shaped bite patterns, matching the dental arc of a bull shark. In water, where visibility collapses within inches, most attacks happen unseen. The river reveals only the aftermath. Juvenile caimans also appear occasionally in stomach analyses, particularly individuals under 4 feet long whose armor has not yet hardened into the dense plating of adulthood. In flooded shallows crowded with vegetation, a young caiman crossing open water may suddenly encounter a predator arriving from below with enormous momentum. What matters most is the pattern connecting all these prey species. The bull shark succeeds because its adaptability extends beyond physiology into behavior itself. Within one lifetime, the same animal may feed on marine fish near Atlantic estuaries, then move thousands of miles inland and begin hunting rainforest animals found nowhere near the ocean. Its methods remain fundamentally unchanged: pressure sensing, explosive acceleration, overwhelming bite force. Only the targets differ. The Amazon did not require the bull shark to invent new instincts. It only required those instincts to point at unfamiliar shapes moving through dark, fresh water. At certain hours of the flooded season, the Boto rises through brown water so quietly that the surface barely changes around it. A pale curve appears between drifting leaves, then disappears again beneath the reflections of submerged forest. Somewhere below that same water column, often within the same hunting ground, a bull shark moves through the darkness by pressure, scent, and electricity. For potentially millions of years, these two predators have shared the same river without ever fully escaping one another. The Boto, Inia jefferensis, predates the modern Amazon itself. Its ancestors inhabited South American river systems roughly 15 million years ago, before the basin reached its present configuration. Over immense spans of time, the dolphin adapted completely to inland water. It became the largest river dolphin on Earth, capable of reaching 9 feet in length and nearly 400 pounds in weight. Its brain is proportionally larger than a human brain by roughly 40%, though intelligence inside the river expresses itself less through abstraction than through navigation, memory, and social coordination in an environment where vision rarely extends beyond a short distance. Unlike oceanic dolphins, the boto possesses unfused cervical vertebrae. Its neck remains flexible, allowing the head to rotate nearly 90 degrees. In flooded forest, this matters enormously. The dolphin can angle itself through submerged roots, weave between drowned trunks, and maneuver around obstacles impossible for rigid-bodied marine dolphins to navigate. During flood season, when the rainforest itself becomes part of the river, the boto enters spaces crowded with branches and suspended vegetation, hunting fish among trees that stood on dry ground only months earlier. The bull shark occupies much of that same territory. Both animals operate within similar size ranges. Both pursue many of the same prey species, including catfish and caracids moving through shallow floodplains. Both rely on non-visual sensory systems to interpret water saturated with sediment and dissolved organic matter. Competition between them is unavoidable, simply because their worlds overlap so completely. The boto approaches darkness differently. It hunts through echolocation, emitting rapid sonar clicks that travel outward through the river before returning as echoes from fish, branches, and moving animals. Some researchers suspect this sonar may provide advance warning of approaching bull sharks in regions associated with shark activity. Boto groups sometimes alter movement patterns or avoid specific channels altogether. The evidence remains incomplete, but the behavioral shifts align closely with predator avoidance. Direct encounters are almost never witnessed. The river conceals too much. What scientists often find instead are traces left afterward. Some boto carry healed crescent-shaped scars matching bull shark bite patterns. The wounds indicate survival rather than fatal predation, suggesting clashes that ended without either predator fully overcoming the other. Those scars remain visible for years, along pale pink skin, silent records of meetings no human observed. Tagging data has revealed another subtle possibility. In areas with especially dense boto populations, some bull shark residency patterns appear to shift away from core dolphin habitat. The dataset remains too limited for firm conclusions, yet it hints at a relationship shaped by long coexistence rather than constant violence. Whatever arrangement exists between them developed gradually across immense stretches of evolutionary time. Two apex predators entered the same flooded labyrinth and persisted there together. Neither displaced the other. Neither vanished. Instead, they continue moving through the same obscured water, separated less by territory than by an ancient understanding carried in behavior, instinct, and caution beneath the surface of the river. Far from the Amazon, in rivers carrying entirely different sediments beneath different skies, the same shape continues to appear. A dorsal fin cuts through fresh water where no large marine predator should logically exist, and once again, the explanation leads back to the same animal. The Amazon is not an isolated biological anomaly. It is the largest expression of a pattern repeated across continents, climates, and cultures, each river adding another fragment to a much wider story. In Central America, Lake Nicaragua became one of the earliest places where scientists confronted this reality directly. The lake lies more than 100 miles from the Caribbean Sea, connected by the Rio San Juan, a river descending only about 100 feet over its full length. For decades, researchers assumed the sharks inhabiting the lake must represent an isolated freshwater species trapped inland long ago. Then, direct observation changed the narrative. Bull sharks were documented navigating the river itself, moving upstream through rapids by leaping in bursts remarkably similar to salmon. Photographs confirmed what local communities had already known for generations. The lake did not contain relic sharks stranded from the ocean. It contained a living breeding population still connected to it. Across the world in India, another freshwater shark reveals the opposite evolutionary strategy. The Ganges shark, Glyphis gangeticus, survives only in river systems and cannot tolerate saltwater conditions at all. Where the bull shark moves freely between ocean and fresh water, the Ganges shark became fully committed to inland life. It now exists as one of the most endangered sharks on Earth, with fewer than 250 individuals believed to remain. Turbid rivers crowded with fishing pressure and industrial development have pushed it toward disappearance. Its existence demonstrates that freshwater shark adaptation is not a singular accident, but a pathway evolution has entered more than once. In southern Africa, the Zambezi River carries another familiar presence. Bull sharks move between surf zones and inland channels so regularly that the species became locally known simply as the Zambezi shark. Human attacks documented in the region show behavioral patterns strongly resembling those observed elsewhere, especially in murky water near river mouths, where visibility collapses and seasonal flooding expands hunting territory. Australia presents the same phenomenon again through the Fitzroy River system. Bull sharks have been documented hundreds of miles inland, appearing in freshwater stretches once assumed safe for swimmers. The environmental details differ from the Amazon entirely: red soils, dry season heat, sparse eucalyptus along the banks, yet the underlying pattern remains unchanged. The shark enters river systems, establishes residency, exploits low visibility, water, and persists where no other large shark can comfortably follow. Historical reports from the Irrawaddy and Hooghly rivers in Asia extend the pattern further, though systematic research there remains limited. Some accounts come from colonial records, others from modern sightings, each one suggesting another population existing partly beyond scientific observation. Taken together, these rivers describe a repeated evolutionary decision. Across 5 continents, the bull shark has used estuaries, floodplains, and freshwater nurseries in almost exactly the same way. It follows sediment-rich water inland, gives birth where larger marine predators cannot easily pursue its young, and hunts effectively in conditions that reduce vision to almost nothing. The Amazon remains the grandest and least mapped expression of that strategy. Its scale, remoteness, and biological density exceed every other known freshwater bull shark system, which means the largest chapter in this global story is also the one science understands least clearly. Inside the body of a marine shark, the chemistry of the ocean is carried everywhere like a second invisible sea. Long before a bull shark enters the Amazon, its blood already contains an internal architecture built for saltwater existence, dense with compounds that keep the animal from drying out in an environment constantly pulling moisture from its tissues. Most sharks never escape that chemistry. Their survival depends on it completely. Marine sharks maintain unusually high concentrations of urea and trimethylamine oxide, known as TMAO, circulating through the bloodstream. Together, these compounds raise the osmotic concentration of the blood until it nearly matches surrounding seawater. Without that balance, water would continuously leak outward through the skin and gills into the ocean. The strategy works so effectively that shark blood carries the faint chemical scent of ammonia, an unavoidable consequence of retaining so much urea inside the body. Yet the same adaptation becomes dangerous the moment fresh water surrounds the animal. River water contains far fewer dissolved salts than shark blood. The osmotic gradient reverses completely. Water no longer escapes the body. It begins flooding inward instead, crossing membranes and swelling tissues. For most marine sharks, this process accelerates rapidly toward organ failure. Cells absorb excess water, blood chemistry destabilizes, and the kidneys cannot compensate quickly enough to survive. The bull shark responds differently. As it moves inland through estuaries and muddy river mouths, its physiology begins altering itself in stages. Blood urea concentration gradually declines, reducing the very chemical advantage marine sharks depend upon in saltwater. Simultaneously, specialized transport systems in the gills increase their activity, pulling sodium and chloride ions directly from the surrounding freshwater before those salts can diffuse away. The shark is not merely tolerating fresh water, it is actively rebuilding its internal chemistry to match a different world. This transformation is measurable. Bull sharks captured in freshwater display significantly different blood chemistry from individuals living in the ocean, despite belonging to the same species. Researchers comparing plasma composition have found altered ion concentrations, reduced urea retention, and shifts in osmotic pressure substantial enough that the animals function almost like separate physiological forms of the same organism. The transition cannot happen instantly. Acoustic telemetry has revealed sharks lingering for extended periods within estuarine gradients where saltwater and freshwater overlap. These pauses correspond closely with the time required for osmoregulatory adjustment. The shark moves slowly because its organs are changing state while it travels. Maintaining that flexibility is metabolically expensive. Continuously pumping ions against osmotic gradients consumes energy every hour the animal remains inland. Estimates suggest freshwater bull sharks may devote a meaningful portion of their daily caloric intake simply to maintaining internal equilibrium. Hunger in the Amazon is therefore tied not only to growth or movement, but to chemistry itself. Deep within the body, the rectal gland reflects this transition with unusual clarity. In marine sharks, the gland functions almost constantly, excreting excess salt collected from seawater. Inside the Amazon, it becomes nearly dormant. The organ remains physically present yet temporarily unnecessary, suspended in inactivity while the shark inhabits water where every retained ion matters. No other large shark has evolved such a complete biochemical system for crossing between oceans and rivers. The bull shark did not merely stretch the limits of marine physiology slightly farther inland. Evolution produced an animal capable of operating across environments that obey fundamentally different chemical rules, carrying an adaptable internal ocean wherever it goes. Far above the places where bull sharks move through flooded forest and dark tributaries, another force has entered the basin, one built from concrete, turbines, cables, and walls high enough to interrupt rivers that once crossed the continent uninterrupted. During the last 40 years, hydroelectric development has spread across the Amazon system at a scale unmatched in its history. Dozens of major dams have already been completed, while many more remain planned across tributaries feeding the central basin. On the Rio Xingu in Brazil, the Belo Monte Dam became operational in 2019 after years of construction that reshaped enormous sections of river. Water that once surged seasonally through forests and channels is now redirected through engineered reservoirs and turbine systems. The river still flows, but no longer with the same timing, force, or rhythm that shaped the ecosystem across millions of years. For a migratory shark, the most obvious consequence is immediate and physical. A bull shark, moving upriver, eventually reaches a vertical barrier impossible to bypass. Unlike salmon, the shark cannot leap cascades or navigate fish ladders designed for smaller species. Entire stretches of historical habitat become inaccessible in a single generation. Every floodplain beyond the dam, every submerged forest corridor, every nursery area upstream disappears from the shark's available world. The deeper disruption is less visible. Amazon rivers are governed by the flood pulse, the immense annual rise and fall that transforms rainforest into temporary inland sea. Bull shark movement patterns are synchronized with that cycle. As waters rise, sharks push into newly flooded terrain where prey disperses through submerged forest. When the water withdraws, they retreat toward the deeper main channels. Dams interfere directly with this timing by regulating discharge and reducing the natural extremes between wet and dry seasons. A shark entering flood season carries internal signals shaped by water chemistry, current strength, temperature shifts, and changing river depth. Yet below a regulated dam, those signals may no longer align with reality. The river rises later, rises less, or remains unnaturally stable. Migration behavior that evolved under predictable seasonal cycles becomes disconnected from the environment that once guided it. Downstream changes extend beyond water level alone. Reservoir systems trap sediment that historically traveled thousands of miles through the basin, altering turbidity and nutrient flow. Water released from deep reservoirs may emerge colder and lower in dissolved oxygen than the river sections they replace. Chemical conditions shift gradually across entire ecosystems, influencing fish reproduction, floodplain vegetation, and microbial life invisible beneath the surface. The consequences for prey species are already measurable. Studies on migratory Amazonian fish populations in dammed tributaries have documented declines between 50 and 80% in some systems. Large catfish that once traveled immense distances to spawn now encounter barriers they cannot cross. Population losses ripple upward through the food web toward predators dependent on those migrations. Bull sharks have not yet been studied directly at the same scale. No long-term dataset exists tracing population response before and after major dam construction. Yet the mechanisms affecting them are neither abstract nor hypothetical. They are the same pressures reshaping every migratory species in the basin, acting upon an animal that reproduces slowly, matures gradually, and depends on uninterrupted river continuity more than almost any predator sharing these waters. Long before chainsaws or roads entered the basin, the Amazon rainforest shaped its own weather through a slow atmospheric circulation invisible from the ground. Moisture lifted from leaves into warm air, drifted across the continent, condensed into clouds, then returned again as rainfall. Billions of trees participated in this exchange continuously, creating vast airborne currents scientists now describe as flying rivers. The forest did not merely grow beside the Amazon. In many ways, it helped generate the river system itself. Since 1970, roughly 17% of that forest has been cleared, an area larger than France transformed primarily into cattle pasture and industrial soy agriculture. From above, the transition appears as geometric openings cut into continuous green canopy, spreading outward along roads and newly accessible river corridors. Yet the consequences extend far beyond the visible absence of trees. Rainfall across the basin depends partly on transpiration, the gradual release of water vapor through leaves back into the atmosphere. Intact forest slows water movement, storing moisture within roots, soils, trunks, and canopy before releasing it again over time. Remove enough forest and the cycle weakens. Dry seasons lengthen. Regional rainfall becomes less stable. Storm timing shifts subtly at first, then more dramatically across decades. For the bull shark, these atmospheric changes eventually become biological ones. The flood pulse, governing migration and reproduction, depends on predictable seasonal rainfall spread across enormous areas of the continent. When precipitation patterns destabilize, the annual expansion of flooded forest becomes less reliable. Water may rise later, retreat earlier, or fail to reach historical depths. A nursery system refined across millions of years begins losing its consistency. Along deforested banks, another transformation unfolds at river level. Tree roots that once stabilized soil disappear, exposing sediment to heavy rains. Erosion accelerates rapidly. Loose earth washes into tributaries and main channels, increasing suspended sediment loads throughout the system. The river grows cloudier still, carrying altered mineral composition and shifting chemistry through habitats already operating near physiological limits. Agricultural runoff compounds the disruption. Cattle operations and soy cultivation introduce nitrates, phosphates, herbicides, and pesticides into waterways during seasonal rains. Nutrient surges fuel algal blooms that consume dissolved oxygen as they decay. Fish kills follow in some regions, especially within slower floodplain waters where oxygen replenishes gradually. The collapse moves upward through the food web. A study published in 2020 documented fish biomass reductions approaching 80% in heavily deforested river sections compared with intact forest habitats nearby. For prey species, diminished oxygen, polluted water, and fragmented habitat reduce survival simultaneously. Apex predators inherit the consequences afterward. The Varzea floodplain is especially vulnerable because its fertile soils attract agricultural expansion directly into the very habitat bull sharks use most intensely for reproduction. These seasonally flooded forests provide shallow, protected nursery zones where juvenile sharks avoid larger predators while feeding among submerged vegetation and dispersed fish populations. Conversion removes not only forest cover, but the hydrological structure supporting the nursery itself. The scale of the contrast is difficult to comprehend. The bull shark lineage endured continental uplift, shifting seas, changing river courses, and millions of years of climatic fluctuation. Its physiology adapted gradually alongside geological transformation unfolding across immense spans of time. Deforestation operates differently. It alters rainfall, flood cycles, chemistry, and habitat within decades, compressing environmental change into intervals too brief for evolution to answer. At night on the Amazon, scientific fieldwork often resembles waiting more than searching. The river widens into darkness beyond the beam of a headlamp, insects collect against damp equipment cases, and the soundscape shifts between distant rain and the low mechanical hum of an outboard motor cooling after hours of travel. Somewhere beneath the surface, unseen animals continue moving through water so opaque that even powerful lights vanish within inches. Amazon shark research exists at the outer edge of what wildlife science can realistically attempt. Many study sites lie deep within tributary systems unreachable by road, accessible only after days or weeks of travel by small aluminum boats carrying fuel drums, medical kits, tagging hardware, surgical instruments, batteries, antennas, food supplies, and spare engine parts. Once the expedition enters those river systems, reliable communication often disappears completely. In emergencies, evacuation may require several days of continuous movement downstream before outside help becomes possible. The environment itself fights the equipment constantly. Humidity near 90% seeps into electronics, corrodes metal contacts, and fogs optical instruments from the inside. Flash floods relocate anchored receivers or bury them beneath sediment. Waterproof housings crack under heat and pressure cycles. Field teams transport delicate acoustic telemetry systems through rapids where a single collision with submerged wood can overturn a boat carrying months of research materials. Unlike many forms of wildlife biology, this work unfolds inside the habitat of the animal being studied. Researchers lean over dark water to retrieve drum lines, knowing the shark they seek may already be attached below. When a hooked bull shark surfaces beside the hull, the danger becomes immediate and physical. A large individual can weigh hundreds of pounds, twisting with enough force to damage equipment, injure handlers, or destabilize the boat itself. Much of the foundational work has been led by Brazilian scientists associated with INPA, the Instituto Nacional de Pesquisas da Amazônia. Their research programs operate with funding far smaller than the budgets surrounding more famous marine predators. Great white sharks have received decades of large-scale international attention, cinematic documentaries, aircraft surveys, and expensive offshore expeditions. Amazon bull sharks are studied by smaller teams, carrying receivers in backpacks through rainforest heat, often building field infrastructure with limited institutional support. The work depends heavily on collaboration with indigenous and riverine communities, whose familiarity with seasonal river behavior exceeds anything visible from satellite imagery. Local fishermen know which flooded channels hold sharks during certain months, which bends become active after heavy rains, and which stretches of tributary remain quiet during low water. This knowledge guides placement of receivers, timing of expeditions, and interpretation of movement patterns emerging from sparse datasets. Near 3 in the morning, on a Blackwater tributary where canopy blocks most starlight, a field team may sit silently in a drifting boat, listening for an acoustic receiver to register movement. The receiver emits a brief electronic ping when a tagged shark passes within range. If the sound arrives through static and river noise, it means a large predator is moving somewhere nearby in darkness, perhaps 200 meters away. Before sunrise, the team may attempt capture, leaning over the same water while preparing hooks, lines, and surgical tools by headlamp. Piece by piece, signal by signal, these researchers are constructing the outline of a population almost impossible to observe directly, racing to understand an ancient system before environmental change transforms it faster than science can record. The rhythm of the Amazon was once defined by repetition so stable that entire ecosystems evolved around its timing. Water rose, forests flooded, channels expanded outward into submerged plains, then gradually withdrew again. Species synchronized feeding, migration, reproduction, and growth to those cycles across immense spans of time. The flood pulse was not perfectly identical each year, yet its overall pattern remained dependable enough that evolution could build lives around it. In the last 2 decades, that predictability has begun to fracture. Since 2005, the Amazon basin has experienced 5 droughts classified as severe enough to have once been considered century-scale events. They arrived in 2005, 2010, 2015 through 16, 2020 through 21, and again in 2023 through 24. The recurrence interval collapsed so quickly that the language used to describe rarity stopped matching reality. During the harshest drought periods, major sections of the river system reached water levels lower than any recorded in more than a century of measurements. Tributaries narrowed into isolated channels. Sandbars emerged where transport boats once crossed deep water. Dead fish accumulated along shrinking shorelines, while river dolphins became trapped in disconnected pools, warming under direct sunlight. For bull sharks, low water reshapes the geography of survival itself. In years when the Varja floodplain fails to inundate fully, the enormous seasonal nursery habitat disappears almost entirely. Forest corridors that normally expand into hundreds of thousands of square miles remain dry land. Sharks that would spread across vast submerged terrain become compressed into narrower main channels and deeper tributaries where competition intensifies and prey becomes less abundant. The water itself changes physically during these periods. Reduced flow allows temperatures to rise faster beneath tropical heat. Warmer water accelerates shark metabolism, increasing energy demands at precisely the moment prey populations are under severe stress from drought conditions of their own. Fish kills associated with oxygen depletion become more common during prolonged low water, particularly in stagnant side channels cut off from stronger current. Climate projections suggest the instability may deepen further. Models examining the basin increasingly point toward stronger oscillation between extreme drought and extreme flooding, rather than the historically moderate seasonal pattern that shaped Amazon ecology for millions of years. Both ends of that spectrum create different forms of stress for an animal adapted to predictable environmental timing. Excessive floods can disrupt reproductive cycles, alter prey distribution abruptly, and increase energetic costs associated with movement through altered current systems. Severe drought removes habitat outright. Together, they create an ecological volatility that compounds across generations. At the Atlantic boundary of the Shark's Range, additional pressures are unfolding simultaneously. Ocean warming alters coastal estuaries and nursery zones connected to migratory populations. Rising acidity changes marine chemistry in ways still not fully understood for cartilaginous fish physiology. Juvenile sharks, transitioning between freshwater and coastal systems, may eventually encounter environmental conditions fundamentally different from those that shaped the species historically. The contrast between past and present operates on entirely different scales of time. Bull sharks survived glacial cycles, continental rearrangement, shifting seas, and the gradual uplift of mountain ranges because those transformations unfolded slowly enough for ecosystems to adjust alongside them. The current changes move through rainfall patterns, water chemistry, temperature, and habitat structure simultaneously within the span of a human lifetime. Evolution cannot answer pressures arriving this quickly. The river changes faster than inheritance can follow. Long after the last cooking fires dim along the banks and the final aluminum boats vanish into side channels, the Amazon settles into a different kind of motion. Darkness does not silence the basin, it rearranges it. The daylight world withdraws upward into leaves and sleeping branches, while the river itself becomes the dominant presence again, immense and patient beneath the humid air. The current presses steadily against exposed roots and half-submerged trunks, producing a continuous hush that never fully repeats itself. Somewhere beyond sight, driftwood turns slowly in an eddy. Water folds against mud banks softened by months of flood. The sound is low and constant, too broad to locate precisely, as though the entire basin were breathing in its sleep. Along the margins, frogs begin calling from flooded grasses and tangled vegetation. Hundreds of species layer their voices together into overlapping pulses, whistles, clicks, and hollow metallic notes. Acoustic ecologist Bernie Krause once described the Amazonian night chorus as the densest biological soundscape he ever recorded. No single animal dominates it. The forest speaks collectively. each call occupying its own narrow band of sound within the humid dark. At irregular intervals, another sound interrupts the pattern. A botto surfaces somewhere beyond the reach of moonlight, exhales sharply into the warm air, then disappears again beneath the surface without a splash. The breath lasts less than a second. The silence after it feels larger than before. Near the edge of a flooded stand of trees, a black caiman waits, motionless in water, shallow enough to conceal only part of its body. Its eyes catch stray light and return it in dull orange reflections. Nothing about the animal suggests effort. It remains suspended in complete stillness, conserving energy with the efficiency of a lineage refined across immense spans of evolutionary time. Beneath this surface world, farther down where suspended sediment turns the water opaque, a bull shark moves through water the color of steeped tea. The temperature surrounding it is almost equal to blood warmth. Visibility extends only inches, yet the river is not empty to the shark. Pressure changes travel outward through the water continuously, carrying information from struggling fish, shifting currents, falling branches, and distant movement. A faint electrical gradient pulses somewhere ahead, intermittent and unresolved. The ampullae along the shark's snout register the signal long before any physical contact occurs. Each sweep of the body through the current updates the surrounding map again. Direction adjusts gradually. The movement remains calm, economical, nearly silent. The flooded forest extends around the animal in every direction. Towering trunks rise upward through 15 feet of water toward a canopy existing in another environment entirely. Fish weave among submerged roots that months earlier stood in dry air. Insects cling to bark above the floodline, while freshwater stingrays rest in drowned leaf litter below. The boundaries between river and forest have dissolved for the season. The shark does not experience this place as mysterious or ancient. It experiences gradients, vibration, conductivity, movement, heat. Every meter contains usable information. Every current carries detail. Above the surface, the night deepens toward morning. Beneath it, the river continues moving through darkness, exactly as it has for ages beyond memory, carrying the shark quietly within its flow. At the mouth of the Amazon, where brown freshwater begins dissolving gradually into Atlantic salt, the boundary is impossible to draw precisely. Sediment drifts outward for hundreds of miles. Salinity shifts meter by meter instead of ending cleanly. The water exists as a gradient before it exists as a category, and within that shifting threshold moves an animal shaped by transition more than destination. Calling it a shark explains only anatomy. Cartilage, rows of teeth, electroreception, the muscular sweep of a tail through heavy water, all of these are real, yet incomplete. Calling it a marine predator is also incomplete, because the first years of its life may unfold beneath flooded rainforest canopy thousands of miles from surf or coral reef. Calling it freshwater does not fit either, because sooner or later the current may guide the same body back toward tidal estuaries and open sea. The bull shark does not remain in one world long enough for the label to hold. Most large animals belong clearly somewhere. A jaguar belongs to forest. A tuna belongs to the ocean. Habitat becomes part of identity, so fixed that the boundary between creature and environment appears permanent. The bull shark unsettles that pattern. It belongs most completely to movement itself, to the unstable corridor where one ecosystem slowly becomes another. A female may be born among submerged trees, standing in 20 feet of seasonal floodwater. Years later, she may travel through estuaries dense with mangroves and suspended salt. Eventually, she may cross coastal shelves where the seafloor falls away into dark Atlantic depth. If she survives long enough, instinct and chemistry may draw her inland once more, retracing the gradient toward river water where new young can survive beyond the reach of larger marine predators. Neither river nor ocean contains the full story of the animal. The continuity exists in the passage between them. Its body carries the machinery required for both conditions simultaneously, blood chemistry altering gradually as salinity changes around it. Organs activate, quiet themselves, then activate again months later. Even its senses operate across categories, reading electrical currents and pressure waves without distinction between fresh and salt water. Human language tends to divide the natural world into separate territories because boundaries feel stable to the observer standing on shore. The shark experiences none of those divisions. The Amazon does not announce itself as forbidden to marine life. The Atlantic does not reject an animal born beneath rainforest canopy. Water connects to water continuously, and the shark follows that continuity without hesitation. What appears extraordinary from the outside emerged without intention. No ancestral shark chose exploration in the human sense of the word. Across immense spans of time, individuals drifted slightly farther into estuaries where prey was abundant and competition thinner. Those that survived carried the capacity forward. Generation after generation, the gradient extended inland, and the animals extended with it. The result is neither myth nor anomaly. It is an accumulation. Millions of years of incremental survival have produced a creature capable of existing across worlds that remain separate for nearly every other large predator on Earth. Somewhere beneath the river's surface, far from any coastline, that consequence still moves patiently through the current, carrying the ocean invisibly within its blood. Near dawn, mist gathers above sections of the river where cooler night air meets water still holding the previous day's heat. From a distance, the basin can appear almost empty, only a broad surface fading into pale gray horizon. Yet beneath that surface exists one of the densest accumulations of life the planet has ever produced. The scale resists ordinary description. Human language reaches instinctively for metaphors: lungs of the earth, carbon sink, biodiversity reservoir, but each phrase captures only a fraction of what the Amazon truly represents. The presence of a bull shark deep within this system changes the angle of observation. It reveals the Amazon not merely as a location filled with organisms, but as an engine of biological possibility, a place vast and ancient enough to absorb improbabilities until they become ordinary parts of the landscape. For at least 55 million years, rainforest has persisted across this basin in some form. Continents shifted, mountain ranges rose, sea levels advanced and retreated, yet moisture continued cycling through leaves, clouds, rivers, and soil across enormous spans of uninterrupted time. Most ecosystems vanish before such continuity can accumulate complexity on this scale. The Amazon remained long enough for evolution to elaborate itself almost without limit. Within a single hectare of forest, the number of tree species can exceed the total found across entire temperate nations. Rivers branching through the basin contain more fish species than the Atlantic Ocean beyond the river mouth. Scientific expeditions still return with animals, fungi, insects, and plants unknown to formal taxonomy, despite 2 centuries of systematic exploration. Discovery here has not slowed with familiarity. The system continues generating novelty faster than science can fully catalog it. The bull shark exists inside this abundance as one expression among millions. Nearby moves the boto, a river dolphin descended from marine ancestors that reshaped itself for submerged forest. In deeper channels glide arapiima armored with scales dense enough to resist the teeth of piranhas. Electric eels navigate murky water through pulses of current powerful enough to stun large mammals. Black caimans wait along flooded margins, with bodies refined across ages older than the river's present course. Even the candiru, small enough to vanish against a finger, occupies an ecological role found nowhere else on Earth. None of these animals emerged suddenly or independently. They accumulated through time interacting with time, layer after layer of adaptation, settling into the basin like sediment carried by floodwater. Isolation allowed strange solutions to persist. Stability allowed complexity to deepen. Scale allowed entire evolutionary experiments to unfold simultaneously across thousands of connected tributaries. From outside the system, these creatures appear improbable because the environments familiar to humans rarely persist long enough to produce them. The Amazon has endured on a different temporal scale. Given sufficient continuity, sufficient water, and sufficient ecological space, life eventually begins exploring possibilities that initially resemble fiction. The shark's presence clarifies this truth quietly. It is not the singular marvel in the river. It is simply the animal most visibly associated with another world, an ocean predator carried inland until the boundary between marine and rainforest ceased to matter. The Amazon did not reject it. The basin absorbed it into the larger accumulation, the same way it has absorbed countless other forms of life across millions of years of uninterrupted becoming. Along the shifting edge, where river water gradually softens the sea, no organism pauses to recognize that a boundary has been crossed. Salinity changes molecule by molecule. Tides continue moving. Rain falls into both systems without distinction. The bull shark enters this gradient not because it understands possibility, but because countless generations before it survived slightly farther along the same continuum. Evolution never intended this outcome. Intention belongs to minds capable of imagining futures, and natural selection possesses no such faculty. What exists instead is accumulation. Far back in coastal estuaries, older than human memory, some ancestral sharks tolerated diluted water marginally better than others. Their kidneys retained ions more efficiently. Their cells endured osmotic stress with slightly less damage. During dry years or shifting tides, those differences mattered enough for survival probabilities to tilt by fractions. The animals themselves experienced none of this as destiny. An individual shark entered murky estuarine water because prey moved there, because currents carried scent there, because survival demanded movement toward food and away from danger. If it lived long enough to reproduce, the physiological traits allowing that survival persisted. Across millions of repetitions, minor variations layered upon one another with extraordinary patience. No ancestor anticipated flooded rainforest. No lineage pursued a grand transition from ocean predator to river traveler. There existed only daily pressures, acting continuously across immense spans of time. Slightly better ion regulation became more common. Hormonal responses refined themselves. Organs adjusted gradually to wider salinity tolerance. Eventually, the cumulative result became an animal capable of swimming between submerged trees thousands of miles from open sea, while remaining fully capable of returning again. The finished outcome appears almost deliberate because the complexity is so precise. Beneath opaque river water, the shark interprets electrical gradients through specialized sensory pores, sensitive enough to detect faint muscular contractions in hidden prey. Its blood chemistry alters as surrounding salinity changes. Organs increase or reduce activity according to environmental conditions without conscious direction. Yet none of these systems emerged fully formed. Each represents a layer added through survival, accumulating atop previous survival. This process extends far beyond sharks. Every organism alive carries an uninterrupted inheritance reaching back approximately 3.8 billion years. Every bacterium drifting through the river, every orchid rooted high in the canopy, every caiman waiting motionless near shore exists because every ancestor in an immeasurably long chain survived long enough to reproduce under conditions that constantly threatened extinction. The bull shark's lineage passed through estuaries, climatic upheavals, mass extinctions, shifting coastlines, and the slow uplift of mountain ranges that redirected continental water itself. At no point was permanence guaranteed. The continuity exists only because each generation inherited enough useful variation to persist into the next uncertain moment. Human beings belong to the same continuity. So do the insects circling lantern light above river villages, the dolphins surfacing briefly in black water, and the trees exchanging moisture with the atmosphere overhead. Life differs endlessly in form, while sharing the same underlying mechanism, variation filtered by survival across spans of time too large for ordinary intuition. The bull shark makes this mechanism visible because the transition it achieved appears dramatic to human observers. Ocean to rainforest feels like an impossible crossing, so the gradual steps required become easier to perceive. In truth, every living thing embodies equally improbable histories. Most simply crossed quieter boundaries, so slowly and so long ago that the transformation now appears ordinary. Far upstream from the cities visible on maps, the tributaries narrow and separate into channels that pass beneath untouched canopy. Satellite imagery records only fragments of these places. Clouds conceal sections for weeks at a time. Water levels change coastlines overnight. Beneath those surfaces, the river system continues into distances so extensive that even now, after centuries of exploration, much of the basin remains biologically unmeasured. Somewhere within that immensity moves a population of bull sharks no scientist has successfully counted. No total estimate exists. Researchers know individuals inhabit the system because tagged animals appear on receivers hundreds of miles inland, because juveniles small enough to have been born locally are captured in freshwater, because fishermen encounter them season after season in places far beyond tidal influence. Yet, knowledge of presence is not knowledge of scale. The basin covers millions of square miles. Acoustic telemetry arrays occupy only isolated corridors within it, small islands of instrumentation surrounded by enormous stretches of unsampled water. Beyond every final receiver station, the river continues silently into uncertainty. The full geographic range of these sharks inside the tributary network remains unresolved. Some major rivers contain confirmed detections. Others contain only scattered accounts from communities accustomed to living beside the water. Entire drainage systems still lack systematic surveys altogether. In many areas, no research expedition has remained long enough to establish continuous monitoring, particularly in upper tributaries reachable only through weeks of travel by boat. The unanswered questions deepen further at the scale of generations. Scientists still do not know precisely how connected the Amazon sharks remain to Atlantic coastal populations. Genetic studies reveal subtle divergence, enough separation to suggest long partial isolation, yet not enough to define a separate species. The exact rate of gene flow between river and ocean populations remains uncertain, hidden within migrations too large and infrequent to observe directly. During severe drought years, Uncertainty widens further. As floodplains disappear and channels contract, researchers do not yet know where the sharks concentrate or how many survive periods of extreme low water. The Amazon has entered an era of repeated climate instability, with historic droughts occurring in rapid succession. Yet, no long term dataset exists documenting how these conditions reshape shark behavior or mortality across the basin. Hydroelectric development has introduced another layer of unknowability. Dams now interrupt migration routes that once flowed uninterrupted across enormous tributaries, altering flood cycles, sediment transport, and spawning habitat for countless aquatic species. Scientists suspect these changes affect bull sharks as well, particularly populations dependent upon seasonal movement into flooded nursery habitat. Yet, without historical population baselines, measuring the scale of impact becomes nearly impossible. Even the most basic question remains unanswered. No one can say with confidence whether Amazon bull shark numbers are stable, increasing, or declining. What exists instead are fragments, receiver detections appearing briefly in databases, tissue samples preserved in laboratories, tooth marks on prey carcasses recovered from muddy banks, oral histories maintained by river communities, occasional silhouettes beside fishing boats at dusk. The certainty ends there. Everything beyond those fragments dissolves back into dark water, moving beneath rainforest older than human civilization itself. For at least 55 million years, the basin has accumulated secrets faster than they could be uncovered, and somewhere within that uninterrupted continuity, the sharks continue traveling channels that science still has not reached, carrying their unanswered lives through the slow current of the sleeping forest. At this moment, somewhere beneath the night sky of northern South America, the Amazon is still in motion. Rain that fell against leaves in the Andes days ago is traveling eastward now, entering tributaries, joining channels, slipping through drowned forests, and carrying entire ecosystems slowly toward the Atlantic. The river never truly pauses. Even in silence, it continues with the patient force of something too large to notice its own movement. The season is changing somewhere along its length. In one region, water is beginning to rise into the forest, climbing roots darkened by earlier floods. In another, exposed mudbanks widen beneath a drying sky while fish retreat toward deeper channels. The river shifts continuously between expansion and contraction, inhaling forest, releasing forest, reshaping its margins with every cycle. Out on one of those channels, a fisherman waits beside a line disappearing into opaque water. The boat beneath him is narrow, worn smooth by years of use, its wooden floor carrying the smell of river mud, fuel, wet rope, and old rain. A lantern hangs low near the bow, turning the nearby current gold while everything beyond it remains hidden. He understands the river through details accumulated slowly across a lifetime. The direction floating debris moves after midnight. The difference between a branch touching the hull and something alive brushing past beneath it. The sudden heaviness that travels through a fishing line when whatever has taken the bait does not behave like any ordinary fish. Sometimes the water itself reveals almost nothing. A broad shape interrupts the reflection of the lamp for a second, perhaps less, then slides downward again without disturbance. No splash follows. No clear outline remains. Only a brief rearrangement of shadow before the current smooths itself closed. Farther upriver, a botto drifts near the surface, in partial sleep, half its brain resting, while the other half remains alert to movement and sound. The adaptation allows the animal to breathe consciously through the night, surfacing quietly beneath overhanging branches where insects gather in clouds above the water. Its body rises and falls with the river, almost without effort. Along a muddy bank nearby, a black caiman waits in stillness so complete that floating leaves accumulate around its flanks. Hours pass without visible movement. Patience is written into its biology, refined across spans of time longer than human history can comfortably imagine. And somewhere between these lives, below the reflected lantern light and beneath the drifting roots of flooded trees, the bull shark continues through the darkness. It follows pressure changes carried through the water from distant movement upstream. Electrical gradients flicker across its sensory field, each heartbeat around it translated into information by organs, evolved for a world without visibility. The river to the shark is not mysterious or black. It is textured, immediate, crowded with signals. The current presses steadily against its body. Muscles adjust. The animal turns slightly and continues forward, not wandering, not misplaced, not entering forbidden territory, only moving through the river as it always has, through water older than memory, beneath a forest still breathing around it, while the immense current carries everything slowly onward through the dark. Long before satellites traced the Amazon from orbit, before maps gave names to tributaries, before anyone measured rainfall or cataloged species, the river was already carrying large bodies silently through its current. The bull shark belonged to that unseen movement long before it became an object of study. For most of human history, its presence existed only as fragments of experience, a torn fishing net, a shape beneath muddy water, a story passed quietly between generations beside the banks. There is a particular sensation that arrives when a hidden reality finally becomes undeniable. Not surprise alone, but a soft rearrangement of the world. The realization that an environment once imagined as understood was always deeper than the boundaries of knowledge placed around it. The Amazon bull shark creates that sensation because it reveals that the river was never merely freshwater, forest, fish, and rain. It was always connected to something larger, a living corridor between worlds. For millions of years, these sharks have crossed distances that seem improbable even now. They moved through estuaries into widening rivers while mountains shifted and forests expanded around them. They entered water carrying leaves, sediment, insects, and the reflections of trees, then remained there long enough for generations of human beings to rise and disappear along the banks without fully understanding what shared the current beside them. The continuity of that existence feels immense against the brevity of human life. Entire civilizations have occupied only a fraction of the time the river has flowed eastward from the Andes. The shark persisted through all of it, not through intention or mastery, but because the system around it remained intact enough to support the ancient rhythm it depended on. Flooded forests still expanded during wet seasons. Tributaries still connected distant regions. Water still moved freely toward the sea. Now, the continuation of that rhythm rests partly in human hands. Not because the river requires admiration, and not because the shark depends on being considered extraordinary, but because industrial change can interrupt processes that once unfolded uninterrupted for geological time. A dam blocks a migration route. A burned forest alters rainfall. Polluted runoff empties oxygen from nursery habitat. None of these changes announce themselves dramatically at first. They accumulate quietly, the way rivers themselves change course. Science gave shape to the hidden patterns, receivers logging movements beneath opaque water, genetic analysis revealing relationships stretching across oceans and tributaries alike. Yet the existence of the shark was always larger than the papers written about it. The river carried the truth long before instruments confirmed it. Indigenous fishermen understood pieces of that truth through memory and observation, through careful attention paid night after night to currents and behavior. Perhaps that attention is part of what matters most. Human beings continue searching remote rivers not only for answers, but because there remains comfort in discovering that the world still contains lives unfolding beyond our immediate view. The dark water is not empty. Beneath the drifting reflections of branches and stars, complex things continue happening without witness. The shark remains there even now, moving through warm current beneath flooded roots and silent rain. The forest still stands across much of the basin. The river still rises and falls with the season, and the water continues onward through the darkness, carrying ancient life patiently toward the distant Atlantic, as it has for millions of years before this moment, and as it may continue long after this one has passed.